keep our senses on the pulses of the constantly evolving tech innovations for you 24/7. Always stay ahead of the bunch. Know what you need to know first and put it into context beyond what any AI can bring, sometimes with sources out of the reach of AI sensors. Stay ahead of the bunch. Know what you need to know first and put it into context beyond what any AI can bring, sometimes with sources out of the reach of AI sensors. Know what you need to know first and put it into context beyond what any AI can bring, sometimes with sources out of the reach of AI sensors.
Welcome to a deep dive. Today we're tackling a really fundamental question, I think, for anyone interested in economic growth and, well, innovation. How do countries actually build these thriving technology industries? And, the sources we're looking at today, they make a pretty compelling case that it all starts with one critical ingredient.
Right, getting the world's absolute top scientists to come work there. Or, stay there.
Exactly.
And we're mainly drawing from this detailed piece by Yann LeCun, laying out his view, but we've also got an assessment of his arguments to kind of balance things.
So our mission really is to unpack the core of what he's saying, look at the specific ingredients he thinks you need for a successful research ecosystem.
And compare different approaches specifically, looking closely at the U.S. versus Europe.
And we'll use that assessment piece, too, to see where the argument holds up best and maybe where it could go a bit deeper.
Yeah, and you're going to hear some really specific stuff like actual salary numbers, how career paths are just fundamentally different.
This isn't just abstract policy chat, is it? It's trying to get at the nuts and bolts, the real drivers of innovation and, well, economic prosperity in the end.
Okay, so let's start where the source does. The central idea makes a very strong claim.
Which is?
That scientific research isn't just part of the picture for economic growth. It argues it's the main engine.
The main engine. Wow, okay. That's bold. So how does it connect, say, a researcher in a lab to, the iPhones and Teslas that grow the economy?
Well, the source lays out this causal chain. It starts with basic research fundamental science, right? Often stuff that happens years, maybe 5, 10, even 20 years before you see an application.
Right, the really foundational stuff.
Exactly. And that's the seed for technological progress. New tech creates platforms, and those platforms then allow for waves of product innovation.
Ah, okay. So basic science, tech progress, new products.
And that product innovation, getting new stuff out there, that's what fuels the sustained economic growth.
Makes sense. And within that chain, there's a specific group the source really zooms in on.
Yes, PhD graduates. They're absolutely critical. They're the ones becoming the next generation of scientists, professors. They carry the torch, so to speak.
They keep the engine running and evolving.
Precisely. They're essential for, replicating and expanding that whole research capacity. And there's a key dependency here, the source points out.
Let me guess. Funding.
You got it.
Yeah.
Especially in academia and public research labs, PhD students and the research they work on, it's heavily reliant on government funding. Grants, stipends, all that.
Which leads, the source says, to a kind of self-evident consequence if you don't have that funding.
Yeah, if you follow the logic through, no sufficient government funding means fewer research professors can support students, fewer students get funded.
Right.
No active research, no steady stream of PhDs means, fewer PhD graduates.
And fewer graduates means?
Fewer new scientists and professors entering the system, which means the pace of tech progress slows down. Less tech progress, less product innovation.
And ultimately, slower economic growth.
Yeah.
It's presented as a pretty direct pipeline.
A critical one, according to this view.
Okay, that chain seems clear. Funding beasts, research PhDs, me scientists, next innovation growth. But the source is careful, right? It says money isn't the only thing.
Absolutely. Foundational, yes, but not sufficient on its own. You need a whole ecosystem.
Okay, so what else is on this essential ingredients list?
Several things. First, you need genuinely appealing career prospects for these PhDs. They need to see paths forward, academia, public labs, industry R&D, good options.
If the future looks bleak, why start down that path? Makes sense.
And it's global. You need top-tier graduate schools and research ops that attract the best minds from literally anywhere. Research talent doesn't really care about borders.
Okay, to attract and keep the talent, what else builds the ecosystem?
A really big one. A permeable boundary between academia and industry. You need ideas to flow back and forth easily. That's key for tech transfer, getting lab discoveries into the real world.
So less of an ivory tower, more of a two-way street.
Exactly. And then access to capital, lots of it. Funding for scientist entrepreneurs spinning out startups.
Right, the initial seed money.
Yeah, but also funding for those startups to scale up to become significant players. If they just get bought out early, you maybe lose some of that long-term impact.
So it's the whole journey from idea to potentially a major company.
Mm-hmm. And the source also mentions attractive long-term research careers inside industry too, not just startups. Some deep research needs that longer horizon.
Right, things that might not pay off in a typical venture capital cycle.
Precisely. And finally, you need employers, industry, maybe public sector too, who have a genuine long-term vision and really value that deep technical talent. See it as core, not just overhead.
It really sounds like a complex machine with lots of interlocking parts. Putting it all together seems like the challenge.
For sure. And the source kind of implies the U.S. has historically done a decent job of this, hence its tech lead. But it also hints, if the U.S. system falters, that could open doors for others.
Okay, which brings us nicely to the individual scientist perspective.
Right.
You talk system level, but what makes a place great for a top researcher choosing where to go?
The source lists very specific criteria they look for.
Okay, let's get inside their heads. What's number one?
Access to top students and junior collaborators. They want to work with the best, the brightest. It fuels their own work.
Makes sense. What's next?
Access to research funding, but crucially, funding with little administrative overhead. Less time on forms, more time on science.
Ah, yes, the bureaucracy battle. Every academic knows that one. What about money? Compensation.
Huge. Criterion 3. Good compensation, and it specifies comparable to top universities in places like the US, Switzerland, Canada, adjusted for purchasing power parity.
So not just the raw number, but what it actually buys you where you live.
Exactly. Real-world value.
Okay, good pay, good students, less paperwork. What else?
Freedom. Big one. Freedom to research promising topics without too many constraints. Let creativity flourish.
Makes sense. Follow the interest in science.
Also, access to top-notch research facilities. Think computing infrastructure, specialized labs, whatever the field needs, that's critical.
And links outside academia.
Yep. Criterion 6, the ability to easily consult, maybe take part-time roles, spend time in industry or startups, keeps things grounded, facilitates that knowledge flow we talked about.
Right, that permeable boundary again.
Mm-hmm. And finally, moderate teaching and admin duties. Enough time left over to actually do the research.
So if you're a top scientist, you're weighing all these things, looking at offers from academia, industry, public labs.
Yeah, you're looking for the best overall package, the best trade-off across these criteria for you.
And this is where the source makes that direct comparison, U.S. versus Europe.
Exactly. It rates European academia generally high on, say, access to students and research freedom.
Okay, good points there.
But it rates them lower, sometimes significantly lower, on funding levels, quality facilities, ease of industry links, and the burden of duties.
And the big one, compensation.
And especially, yes, compensation. The source uses the phrase indecently low for European academic pay compared to top U.S. benchmarks.
Indecently low. Oof, that doesn't pull any punches.
No. And it adds that European industry research labs, compared to the top U.S. ones like, say, Google Research or FAIR, tend to rate low on almost everything, especially research freedom, but also pay and facilities.
Wow. But hang on, the source mentions a counter-argument you sometimes hear, right?
Yeah.
That European positions get tons of applicants, so they must be attractive.
It addresses that. The response is basically, look, the question isn't just do people apply, it's are you attracting and keeping the very best, the most talented people to even consider a research career in the first place?
Ah, so it's about the talent pipeline input, not just the competition for slots at the end.
Precisely. The source suggests that historically, at least in many European countries, a research career wasn't necessarily seen as, a path to a brilliant, high-flying professional life. That cultural perception might limit the pool of absolute top-tier talent choosing science early on.
That's a really important distinction. And to hammer home that compensation point, there's that specific salary comparison. Yeah, it's pretty stark. Let's look at the numbers. Based on mid-2025 data, apparently. France,
Yeah.
minimum wage around $21,600.
Okay.
Early career scientists at CNRS, a big public research body, gets about 32,500 with bonus. That's like 1.5 times minimum wage.
1.5x, got it. And assistant professors.
Early career assistant professor, around 26,700, so roughly 1.2 times minimum wage.
Okay, 1.2x to 1.5x the minimum wage. Now California.
California, minimum wage around $34,300. An early career assistant professor at a UC campus, remember, public university, not Stanford or Caltech, gets $103,700. But that's for the 9-month academic year.
Whoa! Over $100K for 9 months? What about the summer?
Typically, U.S. faculty fund their summer months through research grants. If they do that, the potential annual pay is around $138,000.
Okay, 138K potentially. Now compare that to the California minimum wage.
It's roughly 4.0 times the minimum wage.
Wow. So forget the currency conversion for a second, just looking at the ratio to the local minimum wage, 1.2 or 1.5x in France versus potentially 4.0x in California for a similar starting academic job. It really paints a picture, doesn't it? Puts criterion #3 compensation into very sharp relief. You can see how that might sway decisions for globally mobile talent.
Absolutely. A massive structural difference right there.
And it's not just the pay packet. The source also points to differences in autonomy and career structure, especially early on.
Right. How much freedom and support you get starting out.
Exactly. So the typical U.S. model, you start as a tenure-track assistant professor, temporary job, maybe 6 years, then the big tenure decision, up or out.
High pressure, but what do you get?
Crucially, you usually get a startup package from day one.
Like funding for a company.
Sort of, yeah. But for your lab, it's a chunk of money from the university itself, covers hiring your first PhD students, postdocs, maybe some equipment, your own summer salary for a couple of years. It gets you started before the big grants kick in.
Seed funding for your research program.
And critically, you can officially recruit and advise PhD students immediately. You're the boss of your lab from day one.
Okay, empowered from the start. How does that compare to Europe?
The source points to the European habilitation, that postdoctoral qualification you often need in many countries. There isn't really a North American equivalent.
And why does that matter?
Because without it, even mid-career faculty often can't become full professors, and importantly, they frequently aren't allowed to officially supervise PhD students on their own.
So in the U.S., you get keys to the lab and can hire students right away. In many European systems, there's potentially this extra, quite lengthy step before you get that full authority.
That seems to be the point the source is making, that difference in early career autonomy, the ability to build your own group immediately. That could be a really significant factor for ambitious young scientists.
Right, wanting to make your mark quickly. Okay, so we've covered the main argument, the ecosystem factors, what scientists want, and these stark U.S.-Europe comparisons from the source. Let's bring in that assessment piece now. How does it rate LeCun's argument overall? Strengths first.
The assessment definitely sees strong points. It praises the clarity, the logical structure, that funding innovation and growth chain is seen as very compellingly laid out.
Easy to follow.
Yeah. And practical relevance. Using those concrete examples, salaries, the startup packages, the habilitation thing, makes the points really hit home. It's not just theory.
And timely, I guess, given global tech competition.
Extremely timely and relevant, yes. The assessment notes that countries everywhere are thinking hard about this stuff right now.
Okay, clear, practical, timely. Sounds good. But what about weaknesses? Where does the assessment see room for improvement or, points of criticism?
The main one is that the focus is very heavily on economic and structural incentives. Pay, funding, career paths.
The tangible stuff.
Right. The assessment felt it could maybe give more weight to cultural and societal factors, the less tangible things that make a place attractive to live and work beyond the job itself, quality of life, social environment, things like that.
So strong on the mechanics, maybe a bit lighter on the sort of vibe of a place.
Kind of, yeah. Another point is the perspective is seen as quite U.S.-centric. It uses Europe as the main counterpoint, but doesn't really explore other models much, say, successful approaches in Asia or elsewhere.
A broader comparative analysis might have been interesting.
Potentially, yeah. And one more thing on the evidence.
Yes.
While the specific data points, like the salaries, are seen as solid, the assessment suggests the broader claims about what motivates scientists could be even stronger with more direct empirical evidence, like large-scale surveys or studies tracking scientists' actual choices and stated reasons.
So the criteria list makes logical sense, but more hard data directly from scientists about why they move would bolster the argument about which factors are truly most decisive.
Exactly. But overall, the assessment still views it as a really significant, well-argued piece, especially valuable for highlighting those very specific, often overlooked structural and financial differences.
Okay, so this deep dive has really laid out a powerful case, hasn't it? Following the source's logic. Science as the core engine of growth. Building that engine needs this whole complex ecosystem funding, yes, but also career paths, capital, industry links.
And crucially, meeting the specific needs of top scientists. Good pay, freedom, great colleagues, resources, reasonable duties.
And we've seen some pretty eye-opening differences in how places like the US and Europe stack up against those criteria, especially on compensation and early career autonomy.
Yeah, the sources definitely frame it as a major challenge, but also maybe an opportunity for countries willing to really focus on getting these factors right to boost their own R&D and tech sectors.
It really makes you think. So, given everything we've discussed, these systemic differences, what scientists value, what combination of the economics, the structural, and maybe those less tangible cultural factors do you think is ultimately the magic formula? What's most critical for a country that really wants to lead the world in tech and innovation?
That's the big question, isn't it? Something definitely worth pondering.
Yes, indeed. Food for thought until our next deep dive.
They keep our senses on the pulses of the constantly evolving tech innovations for you 24/7. Always.